whispering pines. Nestled in the heart of New England, there was a small town called Stillwater. The town was like many others in the region, with its colonial-era houses, cobblestone streets, and a picturesque town square. But Stillwater had something that set it apart from other towns, a dense forest known as Whispering Pines, which bordered the northern edge of the town. Whispering Pines was a place of mystery and legend. The locals often spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences that took place within its shadowy depths. Stories of people entering the forest and never returning were passed down through generations. The townsfolk avoided the forest, especially after dark, but the rumors only fueled the curiosity of outsiders. One such outsider was a young woman named Emily. Emily had recently moved to Stillwater from Boston after inheriting a small cottage on the outskirts of town from her late grandmother. Her grandmother had lived in Stillwater all her life, but she rarely spoke about the town or the forest. In fact, she had left a peculiar note for Emily with her will: "Stay away from the forest. Nothing good comes from curiosity." Emily was intrigued by the cryptic message, but she was not one to be easily scared. She had always been fascinated by the paranormal and had spent years researching haunted locations and unexplained phenomena. When she heard the locals whispering about Whispering Pines, she knew she had to explore it for herself. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Emily decided to venture into the forest. The air was cool, and the ground was covered in a thick blanket of fallen leaves. As she approached the edge of the forest, she noticed how the trees seemed to grow taller and denser the deeper they went. The towering pines cast long shadows, and the air inside the forest was noticeably cooler. Emily entered the forest with her camera and notebook in hand, ready to document anything unusual. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. As she ventured deeper, the light began to dim, and a thick mist rolled in, wrapping around the trees like a shroud. After walking for what felt like hours, Emily came across an old, abandoned cabin. It was barely visible through the mist, its weathered wood blending in with the surrounding trees. The windows were broken, and the door hung askew on its hinges. Emily's heart raced with excitement. This was exactly the kind of place she had hoped to find. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dark and cold, with a musty smell that hinted at decades of neglect. The cabin was empty, save for a few pieces of broken furniture and a large, dusty mirror that hung on the far wall. The mirror was ornate, with an intricately carved wooden frame that seemed out of place in such a rundown structure. As Emily approached the mirror, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. She glanced around, but the cabin was empty. Dismissing the feeling, she turned her attention back to the mirror. To her surprise, the reflection in the mirror did not match the cabin. Instead of the dusty interior, the mirror showed a vibrant, well-lit room, filled with people dressed in clothing from a bygone era. Emily stared in disbelief as the scene in the mirror unfolded. The people in the reflection were laughing and talking, completely unaware of her presence. It was as if the mirror was a window into another time. She raised her camera to take a picture, but the moment she did, the reflection shifted. The people vanished, and the mirror showed only her own reflection, standing in the dilapidated cabin. Confused and a little unnerved, Emily lowered her camera and took a step back. That's when she heard it, the faint sound of whispering. It was so soft at first that she thought it was just the wind, but as she listened closer, she realized the whispers were coming from the mirror. Emily's pulse quickened as the whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand. They were in a language she didn't recognize, yet they seemed to beckon her closer. Against her better judgment, she stepped back towards the mirror, trying to decipher the voices. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and the mirror's surface rippled as if it were water. Before Emily could react, a hand shot out from the mirror, grabbing her wrist with an icy grip. She gasped, trying to pull away, but the hand was too strong. Panic set in as she realized she was being pulled into the mirror. Emily struggled, but the force was relentless. She watched in horror as her reflection warped and twisted, her surroundings becoming a blur of light and shadow. With one final tug, she was yanked through the mirror and into darkness. When she came to, Emily found herself lying on a cold, hard floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. She sat up slowly, her head spinning, and looked around. She was no longer in the cabin. Instead, she was in a dimly lit room, much like the one she had seen in the mirror, but everything was faded and ghostly. The room was filled with the same people she had seen in the mirror, but now they were translucent, like apparitions. They moved about the room as if they were unaware of her presence, continuing their conversations and laughter as though nothing had changed. But their eyes, there was something wrong with their eyes. They were hollow, empty, like black voids. Emily's heart pounded as she realized she was no longer in her world. She had crossed over into some other realm, a place where the souls of the lost were trapped, reliving the same moments over and over again. She tried to stand, but her legs were weak, and she stumbled forward. As she moved through the room, the figures began to notice her. Their hollow eyes followed her every step, their whispers growing louder. Emily felt their cold stares boring into her, and she knew she had to get out. She had to find a way back to her world. Desperation fueled her as she searched for an exit, but the room seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no doors or windows in sight. The whispers grew more insistent, and the figures began to close in around her, their hands reaching out as if to drag her into their endless loop. In a moment of clarity, Emily remembered the mirror. It was the only connection she had to her world, the only possible way back. She turned, scanning the room frantically, and finally saw it, a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall at the far end of the room, its surface rippling like before. Summoning all her strength, Emily pushed her way through the ghostly figures, their cold hands grasping at her as she ran. She reached the mirror and without hesitation, threw herself against it. The sensation of falling washed over her again, but this time it was shorter, and she landed hard on a wooden floor. The air around her was suddenly warm, and when she looked up, she saw the familiar interior of the abandoned cabin. Emily scrambled to her feet and backed away from the mirror, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The reflection now showed only the cabin, empty and still, as if nothing had happened. But she knew better. She knew that what she had experienced was real, that she had crossed into a world she was never meant to see. She wasted no time in leaving the cabin. As she stepped back into the forest, the mist began to lift, and the sunlight filtered through the trees once more. The oppressive feeling that had surrounded her inside the cabin was gone, but the memory of what had happened remained etched in her mind. Emily never spoke of what she had seen in Whispering Pines. She left Stillwater shortly after and returned to Boston, leaving her grandmother's cottage to fall into disrepair. The locals noticed her sudden departure and speculated about what might have driven her away, but they never learned the truth. The cabin in Whispering Pines eventually collapsed under the weight of time and neglect, but the mirror remained, hidden among the ruins, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon it. And so, the legend of Whispering Pines continued, passed down through generations, a warning to all who might think to explore its depths. Some things are better left undiscovered.